All right, chapter 13, questions, insights, thoughts?
What was the purpose of all the animals? Was it supposed to, you know, demonstrate like an animal for each person or what? So many.
Right.
Seems like a big waste of.
Yeah, so in the Levitical code, if you go back into Leviticus, you'll find there are sacrifice laws.
Right.
And there's an animal that goes with each of the sacrifices and that matches kind of what you're to do. But one of the things that's interesting, right? It becomes fascinating once you understand it, is that there's levels. So if you can offer a heifer, you can bring a heifer. If you can offer a sheep or a lamb, you bring that, right? And it goes down and down until you get to pigeons, yeah, or doves. And the neat part about that is that when Jesus enters the temple, this will be a second temple, not this temple. When Jesus enters the temple, he overchanges the money change that the money changers of those who are selling pigeons. So the lowest, right? And so it's not a move just for anybody who's offering sacrifice, but in particular to hone in on those who are the most marginalized, those who didn't have enough money to offer any other sacrifices, right? Mm-hmm. So as you go through and they say they put a whole bunch of animals down, what I think that they're trying to say is they're testing for the sins that they have committed in the past. Like, everybody's coming to the new church dedication, bring the animal that you need to bring in order to attest for sin. Well, that's going to lead for a lot of sacrifice, right? If you go to, and they would have known the Levitical code, they would have known what they would have needed to bring and what they could afford to bring. Along with, then there are the festivals which offer grains. And so then the barley harvest comes in, there's a festival that offers grains. Those are different ways of doing offering. They're not burnt. They don't burn. Nope. But if you're ever interested or bored, head back into Leviticus. You'll find all the ritual sacrificing that you want.
That sounds like a big bloody mess. I mean, don't they bring the animals alive and then do they kill them there? Do they bring them dead?
Right. So in Egypt, one of the Eids that's celebrated in the Muslim tradition is done in this same way. And there is blood everywhere. Everywhere. Because you give a sacrifice equivalent to what you have. And essentially the imam goes around and they start with a sharp knife. And I think they try to sharpen it, but sometimes it dulls after you kill enough animals, right? And they slit their jugulars, and so they let them bleed out. That's how most cattle are killed anyway. If you animals are typically, they try to lead them into a place, calm them down, and then they bleed them out. And then they just kind of, when you bled out, you just kind of pass out essentially. You know, I mean, you feel the pain obviously of getting cut, but they just pass out. So yes. Yeah, blood everywhere. You know, I think in terms of, how they talk about it.
Are they killing them in the temple?
Or around the temple, so not inside the temple, no.
But there's a big river around it.
There's a sacrificial place. That's, again, you can go into Kings and read. If you want to go in, you can read all about the temple. It's very, like, if you're an architect, you really find it interesting. If you're not, it's not as interesting.
Well, are people allowed in the temple?
Certain people are.
I mean,
So the high
not
priest,
everybody can go in. I mean, so we're having this
Right.
big celebration,
the priest,
and
often
everyone has
sacrifices.
come, but not everybody can go in.
Right.
They're all outside almost.
The priests and the Levites are the ones that were dedicated to be the folks who take care of it. So A Levite, so in the parable of the Good Samaritan, right, you have the priest that goes by first, then the Levite goes by, and then it's the Samaritan that passes by, right? The priest would have had the most exclusive rights into the temple. The Levite would have been kind of like the groundskeeper, the people that did probably that sacrifice or tending of the animals before they sacrificed them, things along that nature. So there was layers, the Holy of Holies was only the high priest could even enter it on one day. And again, all this is in Leviticus if you want to kind of go back and learn more about sacrifice. That's Leviticus 17, the holiness code. And that is one of the areas that we didn't do in the story and has one of the highest impacts, I think, if you understand how deep that code is into the life and the world that Jesus was walking in, because it's really law oriented. So, yeah.
Something that has to do with, I'm sorry.
Solomon got personal satisfaction out of sacrificing, even though he knew it was wrong. His father told him.
Yeah, later on. Yeah, when he starts to turn towards the other gods. Right?
What?
When he starts to turn towards other gods. Yeah.
Did you ever wonder if God asked you what you wanted, what you would say, what you would ask for?
Oh, that's a good question.
Because I was reading this and thought, I wonder, what would I ask for if I had that? And I couldn't think of, wisdom, yes, but there's so many things that you could think of.
It's the Miss America question.
Or Mr. Aladdin, sir. Right? So you think about a genie coming out of, right? Except for there's no limitations, right, on this one.
Right.
Whereas genie is like, you can't ask for this, can't bring people back from the dead. Well, that's God's specialty.
After the temple was built and Solomon gave all of those cattle and the sheep, thousands and thousands, were all of those sacrificed or were they given to the poor?
So the sacrifice isn't the entirety of the animal. It's actually only the best parts of the animal. And then the rest of it would be distributed usually, and at least the nature of it was amongst the tribes of Levites. And the point of that was they had no process of actually attaining any sort of food. They didn't have land. They didn't have a territory. They were in charge of the priestly tribe. And so they're in charge of giving that. And so part of the offerings were to maintain the Levites. Then beyond that, I'm not sure what the scriptures have to say on that. I would imagine that probably then it would go out kind of like a food bank from that point, but
that like 22,000 cattle and 20,000 sheep and goats, that would serve a lot of people.
A lot.
And in those days they had spoilage also. So
right.
It seemed so elaborate to me when I read that. And I thought, here, these animals are going to be all burned up when they could have been given to the poor. But as you say, if they did give the leftovers, I guess you could even boil the bones for soup. So maybe they did that too. I don't know.
My hunch is that, as they go through, you learn, and you can go back into Leviticus. I think there's a little bit of Deuteronomy too about where exactly the sacrificial lines were for that. And you can kind of do a little research on that yourself. But notice we sacrifice animals and not people.
Yes.
Well, that's a big description. That's a different. Human sacrifice to gods was a common practice. Eventually, you'll hear about Moloch. Did you read about Moloch at the end that Samuel or Solomon starts serving even the god Moloch, Molek, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. And one of the things that we know about the worship of Moloch is that Moloch was represented in a stone statue, and his hands were out like this, and they would heat those hands until they were glowing red, and they would put babies onto the hands of Moloch as a sacrifice.
The detestable God, it says.
Right. And so you understand there, the difference that's happening is that you are only seeing animal sacrifice. Now, PETA's not super excited about that, but there is a differentiation here between humanity and people, and then the rest of creation, essentially thinking created order. Back to Genesis 1.
Kind of a general, all through the Old Testament, God is saying, well, if you just follow my commandments, I'll do this, that, and the other. But he knows we can't do that.
Well, I think he keeps giving us shots. I mean, I think there are times when they are righteous and they follow the rules. They do the right things, right?
Well, only after they've done the wrong thing and they're suffering.
Oftentimes that is the case, right? But this will make the words of Jeremiah ring true even more. For see, the days are coming, surely says the Lord, when I will make a new covenant, not like the covenant of old when I brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. This covenant I'll write on your hearts. No one will say, know the Lord, because they will all know me, right? When Jeremiah proclaims that new covenant, right? It's the Jeremiah, that's the text for Reformation Sunday. The Old Testament reading for every Reformation Sunday, because it's assigned to Reformation Sunday. And it is intentional. The understanding is, if you understand and have read through the Old Testament, which, I dare say many Christians have not.
That's a big if.
Right, have not, then when you hear those words, you, even now, think about those words in the midst of coming through Advent, right? The coming of the Christ child. Like there's a new thing that's happening. And the prophets that proclaim, this is where I think personally the Revised Common Lectionary falls short. They consistently use Isaiah, which is because they want to do first Sunday is always like the second coming of Jesus, right? The apocalypse, stuff like that. The next two Sundays are always John. So last week we had about John. This week we'll have about John the Baptist. And then we focus in on the coming of the Christ child. Well, 90% of churches do lessons and carols, or like the children's program the weekend before Christmas. We never really get into those spaces, so we never really understand all of the other. We don't read Malachi, we don't read Zephaniah, we don't read all these other prophets that are then proclaiming a new way. And again, we have an advantage as we're studying the Old Testament. We understand that there's a new way that God is going to be in this world. But this is they never call me to ask, but
You're right, we do repeat. So on a 3-year cycle, you hear the same things over and over.
the struggle is that Isaiah is over indexed. It has way more pickups than all the rest of them. And I don't know all of it for sure, but it's under indexing the Old Testament in general, and then over indexing the spots that are more Christocentric. So it was designed in a certain way. And because of it, we've I think, lost the narrative of the scriptures. Now, that's again my personal feeling on that. But I think we've lost that movement from tip to tail. But what other questions or thoughts did you had? Those are good ones.
Does it matter that the two women are prostitutes?
Well, it says in the video that they're prostitutes, right?
Well, it says here they're
They-
prostitutes.
I thought it just said they live together.
Just two women.
Well, it said that too. On page 177, about 2/3 down the page, it starts the paragraph.
Oh, yeah, two prostitutes. You know, I think what they're trying to describe, a couple things. A, that Solomon would be even interested in this debate or be observant of it is because you're dealing with low of low on this social honor society sort of hierarchy.
No father figures to argue it.
Then, and this isn't the actual, yeah, I would have to go back and reread in the scriptures, there's a little bit more detail about the story that's added in. Anyway, I would say probably not so much. I think what the wisdom, of course, that passes, it's like a story of wisdom, right? Most people actually know this story. This is a part of our folklore, whether you know it's actually from the Bible. It's different. You might have known the story, but not known that it's a part of scripture. Because everything that he does is kind of like, what's going on? Like you have two equal have claim, it's he say, she say kind of a situation. He comes up with a third way of going about it. And then when she says, no, keep the baby, you think, well, then she must be, not actually the mother or something like that. But then Solomon turns to the story again and says, no, she's the mother because she cares so much for the kid. It's like very twisting kind of logic. And, yeah. It can also be a foreshadowing of what's to come. So this is not the point of the story, but some say that the narrative there is two prostitutes, which will become Israel and Judah, who prostitute themselves. Now Hosea uses that language, not I. They prostitute themselves out into other gods. They're torn apart. They have this thing about who is the real ruler and follower of God. I don't know. It seems like a stretch to me. I've heard it before a couple times, but. Online, I want to make sure we get to your questions or thoughts. Anything? No? You guys were happy with the chapter?
Kind of a
Well, he
clear-
doesn't kill a lot of people, he just marries them,
Yeah.
right? So let's move through a little bit. David harkens back, says, follow God. It's an interesting part of the story of Kings. Don't fall away. Walk faithfully and obedient. And Solomon starts off by marrying the Pharaoh's daughter and then everyone else's daughter around him. And one of the ways that's talked about with that is that in Solomon's time, the land grows considerably. That was part of the territory of Israel. And the idea is that he actually just subsumes peace treaties by marrying all the daughters of all the kings around him, right? So, and then grafts them into the kingdom. And Solomon, is asked for a discerning and wise heart. And that's what he's given. And because he's given it, he's got all sorts of other things. There's secondary influences. As Marge talked about, what would you ask for if God was going to give you one thing, I think most of us might fall on a different place than a discerning and wise heart. Especially depending on when you're asked. Now Solomon's young. They don't say how old he is, but he's young. And if when you're young, you think of other priorities in life, right? There are all sorts of great things that you think would be great to have. And yet this is where he's at. So God gives him wealth. They develop the story here, continues, and then it says that he, and you can go through this in Kings, that Solomon like not only collects wisdom about God, but about everything, right? So he's a wisdom collector of things, all different kinds of things. And then we see in the story here, we go to Proverbs, which are interesting, right? So Proverbs are interesting. The word there for wisdom is chokmah. Chokmah is the word in Hebrew. And wisdom isn't just somebody who is exceptionally bright, like we might think of Pastor Tim as being wise, right? But it's somebody who actually not only has knowledge, but applies knowledge, right? So in other parts where Chokmah is brought up in the scriptures, we see people with like applied trades. They're very skilled carpenter, or they're a very thoughtful teacher. Their chokmah comes with more applied skills, not just learned skills. Like so. Whereas I think we oftentimes think of wise people as somebody who knows a lot. So who is the wisest person that you know? Of course, that's second wisest person that you know, right? Who is that in your life? Yeah.
I always thought my mother was the wisest person, and I really thought that when she was gone, but I don't really have anybody.
Any reason why she was the wisest?
I don't know, she always knew how to take care of situations and say good things, you know.
No.
I always looked to her for guidance.
There you go.
Who was that? We can't hear what everybody's saying. So
We said that her mother was the wisest, that because knew how to take care of situations, was willing to do different things. Is that right?
I think we all have wise moments, but I don't think in every situation that we are, you know, because other circumstances come into view and maybe we don't always make the wise decision. But I guess you don't know that you've made the wise decision until time passes. And then you look back and say, oh, that was the best decision I could have made at that time.
Yeah.
So.
That sounds like a wise statement.
There you go. Anybody else want to share who the wisest person?
My mom and my stepmom and dad are both pretty wise. I would also say Brene Brown.
Brene Brown.
Looked up Brene Brown. Pretty wise about all things.
I think some of the teachers I've had,
Mm.
you know, it's like some people know a lot and you know they do, but when they try to teach you, they can't. So I always appreciate, especially in college, you know, what I would consider a wise teacher, someone that could explain it you know, like your math or whatever concept you're trying to learn, and you got it,
Mhm,
you know, or whenever you went to them and you had a question or a problem, they could help you
mhm,
see it.
mhm, mhm.
I would have to agree, there are wise moments with people
Mhm.
and different kinds of wisdom.
Mhm.
So, you know, I think there's been a lot of wise people in my life, but I would not say there's been a wisest that I would always go to.
Mhm.
Are we wise enough to accept the wisdom that's around us?
There we go. That is part of this. One of the things that David did was Solomon did was that he collected these proverbs, right? And oftentimes they're all attributed to him, but the reality is probably that he was wise enough to hear others and then to accept and to take their sayings and write them down and keep them in some sort of book. So he was more of a collector, right, of proverbs and to keep that wisdom. But even to start off the proverbs, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction, right? And the fear of the Lord, what does that mean? That's just walking around being scared all the time that you're gonna get
No.
struck by lightning?
Respectful.
I think understanding his relationship with us, that he loves us and he died for us and we are his children. And in that respect, I guess it would be like you kind of like you fear your parents. You love them, you're not scared of them, but you respect their ways of rearing you.
Right. What else does fear do? Oftentimes we talk about this when we talk about the catechism, you are to fear and love God so that you, when Martin Luther is doing the explanations, right? And the idea around it is, as Jane talked about, that you understand that you are not God. Right? So you can wake up in the morning and look in the mirror and say, I am not God. And that in and of itself is having fear for the Lord, because you are reverence enough to understand that you are not God. When I graduated from seminary, one of our speakers had us take our diplomas in our hands and said, I have a Master of Divinity. I am not the Master of Divinity. Which is an important description and differentiation as you imagine yourself being, right? You are not the master of all sorts of things. Part of being wise is to understand that others have wisdom and to acknowledge that. And it is important. So there are 3 wisdom books in the Bible. The first book is Proverbs. The next book is, does anybody know? Proverbs? No? It is a book, not Psalms. Everybody says Psalms. It's interesting.
Sounds as first.
Proverbs, Ecclesiastes. Does anybody, for the trifecta, does anybody know the third one? This one, will make that book all the much more sense, right? If you read it in this way.
Revelation.
No, Old Testament. Job. Job is also wisdom literature. And if you understand Job to be in the wisdom literature category versus in like the historic narrative category, it transforms the way that you read and understand that book, right? So Proverbs is the understanding, it's kind of this lots of collected wisdom and knowledge. Ecclesiastes is like, sure, you can have all that knowledge, but I still see bad people getting good things in life. And this,
Yeah.
I don't really care. More like a cynical attitude, right? Ecclesiastes. Kind of a realist, maybe you could say. Think of the most popular for everything. There's a season, a time to dance, a time to mourn. You know, that's a very good summary of Ecclesiastes in some way, because there is all these different times, right, in our life. And part of the wisdom in that is to understand that you're not ever stuck in just one point. So don't ever let your highs be too high and your lows be too low. You know, it's kind of to even you out. Now, people don't want their lows to be low, but they certainly want their highs to be high, right? When we're having good times, we don't want anybody to bring us down. Why are you a negative Nelly, right? That sort of thing. But Ecclesiastes does that sort of sobering work of helping us think through our relationship with the world and the things around us. Because oftentimes people say, and look at wisdom literature and say, Proverbs are promises, right? It is better to live in the desert than with a quarrelsome and troublesome wife. Amen. And I was reading that on Monday. I sent a picture of it to Rachel, said, I'm doing some spiritual reading. That was not a wise move. But there are a lot. When you were reading through these Proverbs, did any of them stick out to you? Okay, yeah.
Fear of the Lord.
Fear of the Lord, yeah. Yeah.
So the translation of that word fear,
Uh-huh.
whatever language it's coming from.
Yeah.
Does it translate into fear as we would normally think of?
It's not, it wouldn't be like a Halloween frightened fear. It would be more like a reverence.
Okay.
And the way that I describe it is, if the president of the United States, whoever they are, Joe Biden at this point in time, walks in the room, you feel differently, right? It would have an impact on you, right? I mean, whether you like Joe Biden or Donald Trump or any of the, like, if the president of the United States walks in the room, the fear of the president of the United States is upon you, right? Just that sort of power differential is like easy to, like, you can feel it in your body, right?
It kind of changes your behavior.
It does. It makes you do things even you don't want to do, right? You agree with things, you laugh at jokes that aren't funny. All that happens, right? And it just changes kind of the way that you are in relationship. Versus if you sat down with Joe Biden and had a couple beers every day for a long time, or you probably would form eventually a different relationship with Joe, right? Yo, Joe, what's up? Throw me another beer, right? I mean, it wouldn't be that same sort of otherness, right? The idea is still to recognize that we are not gods, right? We are creatures, not creators. And we love in the United States to be the creators. We are the power, we hold our own destiny, all that sort of thing. And so the concept really around it is to really maintain that otherness so that you don't think that everything that you do is like Midas, right? Golden touch type of thing. So, but that's how that should be kind of translated or understood. Does that make?
Yeah, so then as you develop your relationship with God over time, and it becomes maybe a little more frequent,
Yeah.
or you're told to pray to him as like Papa.
Yeah, Abba.
It's very friendly kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
So that takes it a step away from not
Mm-hmm.
that it doesn't maintain the otherness.
I think,
But
I
it's
think
closer
it's,
to spiritual,
sure, but I think it's actually more important then that you, when you start to become closer with God, that you still understand that you do not attain knowledge in all the wisdom of who God is.
Yeah.
That's where the Sadducees and the Pharisees get themselves into trouble. They themselves decide that they are gods and have the wisdom and the knowledge, right? It is not being able to make that differentiation. I think that's the really important part when you are more close. I mean, it's not hard when you're not in relationship with God at all to understand that God's different than you, right? God is God and I'm not. That's, but yeah, I think it becomes even more important so that you stay kind of humble, I guess is a good way of putting it. Yeah. Does that get to where you were going?
Because I mean, it's something that's not in discussion.
Sure.
About how people feel about, I mean, some people do definitely translate it as fear.
Sure.
It means live in some moment of fear. And by some of the things that God does in the stories.
Absolutely.
You should fear him.
Don't touch the ark, right? Yeah,
But God doesn't do them in the New Testament. He's not the capricious God of the Old Testament.
same God. Same God. We don't have two gods. It's very important that we get that wrapped around, because I've heard that in all the Bible studies. It is the same God in the Old Testament as in the New Testament as in our sanctuary on Sundays and every other day that we pray. It's the same God. Same God, but a different covenant. It's a different covenant. Right?
Well, the first one really didn't work so well.
First couple, Noah's covenant, Abraham's covenant, David's covenant, all these covenant at Israel, all these promises are a shifting movement of God and God's relationship with God's people.
But in the covenant, does he say, and if you stray, you will know immediately, maybe, or your children will know for a lifetime. It
Right,
seems like
I am a
he's
jealous
vague.
God. Right? That is why I am the Lord your God, you shall have no other gods before me. For I'm a jealous God who will bring enmity and wrath to the 100th generation. But those who love me, I will still show steadfastness or faithfulness to the 1,000th generation. Now that shows a bit about who God is, right? And that 10 times more God will show love than wrath, right? But God's nature isn't. Sometimes I feel like we have created a God that represents us and our societal understandings more so than trying to understand who God actually is. And when we stop trying to create Santa Claus, then we have a better understanding of how God functions in this world. And we get to better understand that the other areas of who God, we're not God. We can't form God into our own image, right? Second commandment.
So the guy he kills for touching the ark, God knows that guy doesn't love him, like David and Solomon, who he doesn't punish, but he's gonna punish their kids.
Well, I don't know why God decided to do that. That seems odd to me. As much as it, there's still a lot of really, next chapter, there's some really hard things that happen. Even you think of the baby that David and Bathsheba had, right? That dies. And that's troubling, right? I think it's okay to acknowledge that without having to have an answer for it.
Well, so I guess I'm guilty here of trying to apply human logic to God.
Well, there's that too. I think that it's really tough, right? This is the benefit of Holy Trinity Sunday, when we talk about God in 3 different parts and we try to say all these things, but the ultimate thing that we say is that God is a mystery. And we hate mysteries.
We like to solve them.
Right. we've, forever and a day, we love reading them and they intrigue us, but we are not okay. And yet there are lots of mysteries in life. There's lots of mysterious things that occur and happen. But they make us feel uncomfortable and we want to figure things out. And I think that that's natural. You see that throughout all of the scriptures. Even Solomon's dedication of the temple in this chapter was a recognition that God, even the highest mountain couldn't contain you, right? It's a recognition of God's presence everywhere. Yet we pray that you will be for us. And ultimately on page 187, right, at the very end, that you will hear from heaven your dwelling place. And when you hear, forgive. Right? That is an important line. Solomon is again here in his wisdom, not asking for everything to be solved, right? But ultimately he looks for the most important thing is to be in right relationship with God through forgiveness. Right? When you screw up, you say you're sorry and you right the relationship. That's all you can do. You can't, go back in time. You can't do all those sorts of things. But like when things happen, you say you're sorry and you look for forgiveness and you move forward with that forgiveness. It doesn't help to sit there and try to justify all your actions. Self-justification. Proverbs is good for that, right? If you read through Proverbs, read through these Proverbs, there's a lot of really helpful things. There were some Proverbs that when I read, I was like, yeah, get them. And then I was like, some of them were like, ooh, a little close home, God. Let's not use that one. How about skip that one? White out, please, right? Because for each of us at different points in time in our lives, sometimes these Proverbs, they really strike us and they're reminders to us, and sometimes they're just things that are existing, I don't know. Did you have any of them that kind of stood out to you?
And one I thought was interesting, is the one that says the king's wrath strikes terror like the roar of a lion. Those who anger him forfeit their lives. And I thought, well, if Solomon actually wrote that, then he doesn't want anybody arguing with him or having a different opinion, or he's wise, so they, I don't know.
Yeah, or is it a warning to kings? How about online? Anybody strike in on any of these?
I really like the one, a gossip betrays a confidence, so avoid anyone who talks too much.
Not a bad idea.
I was reviewing one of them on page 180. My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline and do not resent his rebuke, because the Lord disciplines those he loves, as a father the son he delights in. And in one of my other readings this week, it coincidentally kind of addressed that, and just be grateful, show some or feel some gratitude for the discipline that you receive, because it means God loves you. That, well, that's just kind of a little hard pill to swallow too, but
Well,
but it's true.
yeah, and then the conversation really is around, what does discipline look like, right? Yeah. I was going to read this one to my children. someone curses their father or mother, their lamp will be snuffed out in pitch darkness.
Right.
Put that biblical verse on our wall. You know, how some people put those verses on their walls. I could make plaques out of that. I bet you'd sell like hotcakes in Christmas. A fortune made by a lying tongue is a fleeting vapor and a deadly snare. That is true. Okay. Anyway, as you move through these, they are not promises. So people lie and make a lot of money out of it and seem to live a very healthy life and fine. And this is where Ecclesiastes kind of comes in. But a good reminder is that these are not promises. These are proverbs, right? These are movements that if you live them, things will go better for you. And that's the reality. If you're a lover, those who love pleasure will be poor. Those who love wine, olive oil will never be rich, right? If you decide that you want to have early on, especially in life, all of the nicest of nice things, this will limit your capacity to have compounding interest, right? Eighth wonder of the world. These sorts of things, like they make diligent. There was a proverb about sluggard and doesn't plow. Yeah, and that's been taken right from the ants and the grasshopper. Everybody read that story when they were little, right? The ants work really hard, they store up, and the grasshopper is always just hanging out, like doing whatever the grasshopper wants. Winter comes, grasshopper runs out of food, right? And the conversation about kind of that's there. I mean, and then it's hard because then you got to go find food. You got to ask for food, and that's a hard position to be in. To do that. All right, we're past our time. There was a lot of really good things in here, but what you'll notice is that we're moving now from the Solomon, and then we have Solomon's kids and a guy in Solomon's court, and we have a firefight over the kingdom. And so next week you'll start to enter into more of a kingdom narrative and then a separation, and kingdom is torn into two. So yeah, Rehoboam and Jeroboam. Cut the